Now, I mentioned this article here. It's actually a PDF that came out of Georgetown University, I think it was. And it's on population engineering. Very interesting article, but not so unusual in academia, where our tax money has them studying all of us on behalf of our betters. And this is population engineering and the fight against climate change. This is 2016. It says, we argue that the threats posed by climate change justify population engineering, the intentional manipulation of the size and structure of human populations. Specifically, we defend 3 types of policies aimed at reducing fertility rates, for the hard of thinking, aimed at reducing fertility rates. Choice enhancement is one, preference adjustment and incentivization. While few object to the first type of policy, the latter two are generally rejected because of the potential for coercion or morally objectionable manipulation. We argue that forms of each policy type are pragmatically and morally justified. Let's say it again, Choice enhancement, number 2, preference adjustment and incentivization. While few object to the first type of policy, the latter two are generally rejected because of their potential for coercion or morally objectionable manipulation. So they argue that the forms of each policy type are pragmatically and morally justified, perhaps even required tools for preventing the harm and the harms of global climate change. See, they're blaming you for all the global change. Nothing to do with the planet, nothing to do with your disinterest from the sun, etc., in different phases and we go through cycles of this. India has got a fantastic history of the planet, actually, going back further than most folk. And they mention this kind of thing happening so many thousands of years, because we don't go in some perfect circle around the sun. We never have. And they've always wanted to have the population cut. And it's no coincidence that the Western countries have been going sterile for a long time now. And it really isn't. You got to get out of this idea of coincidence theory. The big boys want, they get, and the general population will always make excuses. Well, they'd never do that. It's like HARP with the technology and standing wave technology, which they tested all through the 90s pretty openly. And you could see the standing wave results that they were causing, a big superheating atmosphere. It's almost like a standing wave of heat, you might say. And how they could even alter the jet stream and take clouds away from an area and that naturally meant bring them into another area. So you get flooding around it. And you get in the center this very dry as a bone type of heat wave, which we've had here in Ontario. And a few years ago, we had the opposite. We had the rain here almost every day, one summer, well, a couple of summers, in fact, and lots of fungal problems because of it. Incredible rain. And now it's the opposite. Now we're getting rain around Ontario in a circle, down into the States, Pennsylvania, New York, and even Toronto with the flooding. But here, further north, it's just dry as a bone. Of course, they'd never use it, would they? They just make these things to admire. But everything that's happening, and scientifically, is for control purposes, always is. I remember the Club of Rome said they were given the task of finding reasons for taking over and destroying the old system of people having rights and all that, and having to accept that their betters, the educated elites, would control them on behalf of the dominant minority of financiers, etc. Anyway, back to this article, and it's under population control, climate change and public policy, fertility and procreation. Two uncontroversial ideas set the stage for the article. First, climate change is amongst the most significant moral problems contemporary societies face in terms of its urgency, global expanse, and the magnitude of its attending harms. Second, population plays an important role in determining just how bad climate change will be. And so here's right off the bat, it's you as the problem. Again, the Club of Rome said that man then would be the problem. We'll blame him for famine, drought, and the like, he said. And that would fit the bill. That would fit the bill. Right? So here's this article going on and using it all. Using the Club of Rome stuff. On the basis of these claims, they'll argue that we will call population engineering the intentional manipulation of size and structure of human populations as a practical, morally justifiable means to help ameliorate the threat of climate change. Policymakers and moral theorists alike have been reluctant to wade into discussions of population policy. No, they haven't actually. It's just that they won't come out and tell the public this. But they certainly are not reluctant. They're getting well paid to do this stuff. We think that this reluctance is unjustifiable and ultimately irresponsible. And then it says we'll identify 4 types of practices and policies hereforth, simply called interventions that could effectively reduce human fertility rates. 1, clearly non-coercive choice-enhancing interventions. 2, possibly coercive preference-adjusting interventions. 3, possibly coercive incentivizing interventions. And 4, clearly coercive interventions. And then they go through the techniques here of making these things happen. The interventions can be designed and implemented as part of a global population engineering program while minimizing the possibility of coercion, and should be further investigated by ethicists, social scientists, and policymakers. But no mention about the general public, which is the target of all of this. You understand the system you're actually in, folks? This article here and a study is not off the top of their heads. They're getting funded to do this. And you understand the big picture of it all. You've been living through it your whole life and you don't even know it. Along with the standard repertoire of broader policy efforts to fight climate change, which will include reducing consumption-related waste, switching to renewable energy sources. This is all control techniques, funding adaptation efforts, etc. And also give other articles too, and books out there by other folk. They always love to quote each other, you see, since they're all employed by the same global employers at the top. Goes on to say the climate change crisis and the greenhouse gases as always, and how every person born creates more greenhouse gases, etc., and consumption, and how just terrible it is, these births of people, you know. What they really mean is the wrong kind of people. As I said before, you see, most of us are obsolete now. We're still making money for our owners, but they've got machinery, they've got all kinds of techniques to rake in incredible. I mean, from the 60s onwards, their own United Nations privately controlled and created system by the Royal Institute for International Affairs, along with the World Bank and the IMF and the Bank for International Settlements. By the way, that's how they control the world. They actually said at the United Nations that they would, with the population department, which was set up by Rockefeller, by the way, for the United Nations on population reduction, they'd have to find new techniques to sterilize the people and bring down the populations. But the UN also would say about the massive increasing gap. They used to release percentages every year from the rich to the majority and to the poor, and how it was like massive chasms, starting from little crevices to massive chasms, and now it's beyond canyons and so on, with incredible profits they're raking in from third world countries. They really don't need the masses at home except to shove into uniform if anybody reneges on agreements, because these are global agreements between all the countries. All the countries. So if someone wanted to pull out of it, or go their own way or whatever, they can always get a massive army of cannon fodder if necessary, which they'll always use, they think, before they go into the next step, weaponry, etc. But climate control weaponry, weather modification, is a very precise thing today and very easily done. And it's interesting that those who are involved in geoengineering are also the same shareholders in the big chemical companies, etc. They make the stuff to be sprayed above us all the time. And I've done the articles on them before. It's not guessing, it's not making stuff up. It's only unbelievable to the public who believe the media out there and television is an appendage to their brain. I'm not kidding you. That's how they've been trained to think. If someone in authority says it on television, they'll believe it. If you tell them the same thing with 1,000 times more evidence and show them the evidence, they'll ignore you. They need the affirmation by an important or authoritative type personality. Very easy. This is all again studied and studied and studied. They can train the rest of them to laugh at you by saying the same stuff which they'll put their own guys forward to say in the future. So anyway, they go on about all the reasons and problems that you have and use all the Oxford studies and Harvard studies and every other study, etc. and all the different United Nations departments, etc. But it's all your fault, and you can't live like this anymore, and you can't have children like this anymore. This stuff goes back, way, way back, of positive eugenics, negative eugenics, and positive abortions in a sense, and negative ones. And it all comes down to who should have children, who will not have children. And years ago I read articles from the same sources, by the way, that said that eventually one of your privileges in the future will be to have a child selected, but a child basically granted to you, to have a child, permission by the world government or authority. You don't have to call it government, you call it governance. Because there's so many aspects of government today and governance, most of it private and academic, and most of it commercial, massive commercial, private, that you don't vote for any of it actually. And that's so much for your democracies. Whether it's a republic or a democracy, it's all the same thing. It's a joke. It really is. Anyway, they even talk about mass migrations to mitigate climate change, etc. I remember reading an article from the Rockefeller's Foundation years ago, many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, 30 even, talking about the same thing. They would use mass population movements to destroy the old system of the West as well, under the guise of climate migrants. The rest of this particular long PDF, by the way, very interesting, with the percentages, etc., and go into all the things they have to do to save us all. It's for the greater good, you understand. That you must be sterilized. And it'd be even nicer if a lot of you would just die, etc. And saving money, right? Well, you save a lot of money as well. And that's, of course, why you've always, and for every person you kill with assisted suicide, as I like to call it now, they're all doing the same thing. It's all that money they can save and the carbon they can cut out by killing the old folk off and then killing the fetus in the womb so it doesn't get a chance to add to the greenhouse gas, etc. Yep. You better really sit and think about the system that's on top of you, dominating you, that's indoctrinated you, that's brainwashed you. You better think about it. Because this is not made up stuff, folks. This is only one article of many, and it's pretty tame in a sense. Some of them are rather more vicious